That was not quite as anticlimactic this week.
Yeah, it was a lot shorter.
You didn't do the full video.
I cut it in half.
Yeah, so good to see you.
We have Tom and Cindy Talty here. Hey guys.
And we've been eating pizza.
Yeah, that's why
we're a little hurried. Pizza place
out of breath.
was late.
If you hear us breathing heavily, that's mainly me.
We're using our fancy audio again this week, so we hope the folks that have jumped in here to listen will give us a thumbs up or down early on here before we get into our study to let us know if we're okay. The sound, we know we're not okay.
Yeah, I was suggesting about 20 minutes ago that we try high definition tonight because I know that's what everybody wants to see. Is high
we don't want to do that.
But yeah, we ran out of time as we were getting ready to go live.
And it's all because the pizza was late.
Yeah. That's okay though.
It's a little bit of a disaster here in Freeport today, but that's okay. The delivery system will recover. You've said hello to Tom and Cindy?
Yeah.
And there's Peggy and my mother-in-law, Ruth Green Cooper. She's very interested in the study on Ruth.
Her namesake.
Peggy Benson Way is out there. I've got a few other folks. I can't see who it is necessarily, but I know they're out there somewhere.
Noel.
So, hey, there's Noel. Good to see you.
Good to have you.
Thumbs up, he says, on the sound. So that's great. Whatever device you're listening to is well connected. Sound is great, says Cindy Talty. So super. Thank you for giving us a little feedback immediately. Some announcements?
Yeah.
Things to talk about?
Oh, man, you'd be remiss if you didn't.
We'll go ahead. Oh, yes, I know that one. But it is today. Long live the Queen. Cindy's birthday today.
Happy birthday, Cindy.
I think she's partying somewhere at a safe social distance. But she, I'm not going to say the number. She doesn't mind me saying it, but I won't say it just to stay out of any trouble.
Yeah, it's wise.
Her mother's watching too, so her mother could chime in and tell her exactly where she was.
That's
X years ago this evening, somewhere in Houston, Texas, where Cindy was born.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's wild.
Yeah, all Cindy and her siblings were born there. Her dad's from New Jersey, mom's from North Georgia mountains, but they're all born in Texas.
That's so strange. Yeah,
it's good.
That's cool.
Good stuff.
So just a quick announcement. Deb Riccatelli reached out to me earlier today.
Riccatelli the whole time.
She shared that beginning February 10th, they will begin their new Bible study at 10 a.m. on Wednesday mornings via Zoom. So if you want to contact her about how you can get involved, her email is there, drick, that stands for Deb Riccatelli, 0915 at yahoo.com. Once again, drick, 0915 at yahoo.com. Contact her about getting involved with this Bible study on Zoom on Wednesdays at 10 a.m. They will be studying 2 Corinthians.
Oh, my goodness.
They're dabbling in some fun stuff, man.
Yeah, oh, my goodness. Patty Stanley has joined us. Hey, Patty. Nancy Gross is there. Thank you, Nancy, for the happy birthday to Cindy.
Oh, Cindy Talty says sound is.
Thumbs up, though. It says, I think it's a thumbs up
I think she's
icon.
saying sounds good, but we're not.
Okay, well, that's all right.
That's what I assume. Yeah. Thanks, Cindy.
Well, that's just because she has purple hair and her little emoji.
Oh, you have emojis there? I can't see that stuff.
Yeah, so it's pretty cool. So
I don't get to see that.
Yeah.
So I'm missing out. But anyway.
You are. What did we learn last week, Mr. McHugh?
We learned context. We learned a little bit of background. We learned some history on Ruth. So tell me about it.
Well, again, every winter we have this winter Bible study. And we were deliberate about it this year. Again, no coronavirus stopping us from having our winter Bible study, even though things are a little bit discombobulated and have been for a year. And online for the next few weeks, we'll be doing this study on the book of Ruth. Hope studies in the book of Ruth. And as a companion piece, as they say in the business, doing a sermon series as well within the book of Ruth. 2 completely different things.
Carry Hope in Your Heart.
Carry Hope in Your Heart.
Preaching series.
Is the preaching series. What we're able to do, here tonight's 45 minutes, much more in depth. What I do on Sunday mornings is more like 20 minutes, much more practical. And so 2 different approaches. Why the book of Ruth, you may ask, faithful watcher? Well, you said that you needed something. Hey, Faye, glad you could join us tonight. You said that you needed something positive, something uplifting. And there's Faye Messer-Reed joining us at the same time. Good to see you.
Wow.
Faye, I miss these folks. I miss seeing y'all. So it's good to see that y'all can join us here. You as faithful watchers of our Q&A series said something uplifting, something hopeful. And so we begin with Ruth, and though her story does not begin with a lot of hopeful and uplifting stuff, thankfully the story doesn't stay there. And the tragedy, as her story is told, is transformed. And I read a poem from Padre Thomas last week, his poem Narrative Theology, and I had a couple folks ask if I would reread that, and I'm so glad about that because it's a favorite of mine. And I actually have some of the text here for you as well. This is from Padre, and it's entitled Narrative Theology, and it should encourage us all about how wherever we are in our story, that story is still being told. And again, Padre writes this and in his interactions with a therapist who was helping him work through a lot of trauma. And I said to him, "Are there answers to all of this?" And he said, "The answer is in a story, and the story is being told." And I said, "But there is so much pain." And he answered, "Pain will happen." Then I said, "Will I ever find meaning?" And he said, "You will find meaning where you give meaning." The answer is in a story, and the story isn't finished. The answer is in the living and the dying, in the trying for redemption on an empty hill of crosses. It's in the shoring up of hope and the gathering of losses. It's the looking for companions in the hills and in the glens. It's the waking up and the walking up and starting up again. The answer is in the living and the trying. And I said to the wise man, "What is the answer to all of this?" And he said, "The answer is in the story, and the story is just unfolding." That's just a great introduction to a lot of our lives, but especially in this study of Ruth. We learned last week that there are three major characters.
Yes.
Do you remember them?
I mean, from the beginning, or are we talking about the three main overall?
The three overall.
Overall,
in
okay,
Ruth.
yeah. Ruth, Boaz,
Ruth is
and Naomi.
one, and Naomi is the other, and
Mara
Boaz.
is her newer name.
It will be, as we discovered
Oh,
tonight.
I don't want to get that.
No,
away.
that's good.
Yeah, don't be bitter about that.
Don't be bitter about it. Their story unfolds mainly in Bethlehem, and we learn that the story unfolds in the time of the judges, and we will cite that again as we move on tonight. And I don't know if I even mentioned this last week. I haven't edited the audio from last week yet. But did we get to talking about the main themes of the book?
I
don't think we
I
did,
don't
but
recall.
But as maybe introducing them, not recounting them, the book has a lot of lament in it. Mm-hmm. Lament is a good Hebrew Bible word. Lament is more than grief. It's more than sadness. It's this sense that things are out of place.
Right. Yeah.
That life is not as it should be. So there's a lot of lament in the book of Ruth that we can all understand. The book is about loyalty. The loyalty of Ruth primarily, and how it transforms Naomi's life, and really, as we'll get into the story, transforms Hebrew life going forward. There's a theme of faithfulness, the faithfulness of God, even though God is hiding behind the scenes and blamed for a lot of the evil and ill that takes place. God remains faithful throughout this story. And then there is, like now, that's right, Pamela, Jane has joined us, Elizabeth has joined us. And it's a story about redemption. All will be made well, to quote St. Julian, all manner of things will be made well. And this is the uplifting part. This is the positive part. This is the hopeful part. And we will get there almost as soon as we get out of chapter 1. But chapter 1 is a brutal chapter to read, a brutal chapter to study. We're going to do that tonight and get it behind us. But it's necessary.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about the return of Naomi to Bethlehem, and we'll actually talk about it all. She left Bethlehem, and she returns to Bethlehem, and that's all captured in chapter 1.
If you don't mind,
Please,
can I paint a backdrop too?
Please do.
Yeah,
This is your house, man.
It's my house. the in researching for this particular study, one of the biggest questions that we brought up last week is, why is this book here? What's the purpose of this being placed within this book when they compiled all these different books and they had different things they could pull from? This story made it in while others didn't, into the canon. So, in researching and studying this, once you start diving into the historical context and what was happening as it's being set up here in this moment, it's like I talked about to you with you the other day in the car. You have this unique situation where from the time of Joseph to Moses is a 400-year gap, and in that time the Israelites are being oppressed and they're slaves in Egypt. And it isn't until Moses, through God's power, brings them out of Egypt and into the wilderness. And it doesn't take much. It doesn't take much to really dive into the psyche of what they just went through, because the only thing that these Israelites would have known and understood is what it's like to be oppressed and what it's like to be a slave.
Displaced.
Displaced, exactly. Yeah. So they go through this wilderness, and obviously they're grumbling and tormented by this idea of, we just left everything we knew and understood, right? I'm not going to dive into all the different things that happen while they're in the wilderness, but it just kind of paints that picture of, here they are leaving this familiar territory. Even though they're oppressed, that's what they desired, rather than the things that God was setting apart for them to do. So then they spend 40 years in the desert, and then that generation does not inherit the land that God said, I'm setting apart for you. Right. It's the new generation that goes in and takes it captive. But their understanding of culture, of religion, of faith is very intertwined with this misunderstanding of faith in relationship with God. Even though God is the one leading them through all this.
God gets them out of Egypt.
Right.
But they could not get Egypt out of them.
Right. So when they're there in this new land, it doesn't take them long to fall away from the things, from the law of Moses.
Right.
And once you start to understand that's what's happening over the course of 700 years, by the time you get from Joseph to Ruth,
right,
you have this just dysfunctional
centuries in slavery, followed by a couple centuries of stability,
right,
and conquest, followed by a couple more centuries of disaster.
Right. So by the time you get to Ruth, you have this group of people that they still have no real strong identity,
and they are old souls.
They're old
from what they've experienced.
Yep. And then you get to the point where they're in this land amongst enemies, and these tribes have leaders, they have kings, and they go, that's what we need. We need some sort of leader.
We need stability,
because this is all very loose and hanging on by a thread. Right. So yeah, that's a little bit of a context of
chaos,
backdrop,
utter and total chaos,
and that's what we're sitting in right here.
And it's interesting, that we look at the last year, and there's been a lot of chaos. There's been a lot of displacement. There's been tons of loss, and we feel it for a year deeply.
Yeah.
There are generations of people who live like that for an entire generation.
Yeah, that's heavy too.
And it has a profound impact as what we see, and it's one of the reasons why the story is here.
Right.
Well, let's jump in, and we have some scripture slides for you if you want to follow along. Hey, Kaylane Griffin, good to see you. Susan Hines, my buddy, she's joined us. Susan Thornton has joined us with a fantastic comment. You have my exact permission to go and look at her comment in the video feed in her use of the word lament. We have some scripture slides. I'm going to put them up there. Read the scripture, stop, talk about that particular text, and we'll that'll be the way that we move tonight. So we begin in verses where all beginnings are made at the start, verses 1 and 2 of Ruth 1. In the days when the judges ruled in Israel, a severe famine came upon the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah left his home and went to live in the country of Moab, taking his wife and 2 sons with him. The man's name was Elimelech, and his wife was Naomi. Their 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, they were Ephrathites, the tribe of Ephraim, from Bethlehem in the land of Judah. And when they reached Moab, they settled there. Let's stop right there. Verse 1 reiterates what we've just talked about. It's the time of the judges. And I've got a timeline for you tonight that captures, Garrett was reading my mind, that captures this timeline he was just describing. It's a picture slide there.
An Old Testament timeline.
Mm-hmm. Old Testament timeline from Abraham to David. So Abraham is at 2000 BC. So Abraham is as far removed from Jesus as we are. God establishes a covenant with Abraham. The Jewish nation essentially is born at that point. 500 years later, we arrive at Moses, 1500 BC. He is the deliverer, the one who brings the people out of Egypt. And after his and Joshua's death, just as Garrett was talking about, the time of the judges is upon Israel, roughly a 350-year period, give or take a few decades.
Yeah.
It's impossible to pinpoint it. And these judges are local, at most regional leaders. Hardly ever were they national leaders. Some function as military generals. Some function as spiritual leaders. Some function as social leaders. And sometimes all 3 of those come together in the same person. People like Gideon and Samson and Deborah, and ultimately Samuel, the last of the judges. And we have him on the scene about 1075 BC. He is the last judge. We could say he is the first prophet in the prophetic tradition, even though he wasn't a writing prophet in the same way that some of the later prophets were. And he has 2 books in the Bible named after him. And he is the one transitions the nation to the monarchy. Mm-hmm. And the events in the book of Ruth occur in the last decades of the judges period, just before Samuel really comes to power. So Garrett, as you were saying, Ruth, Naomi, Boaz, these main characters, this family we've just mentioned here from Bethlehem, they are at the tail end of 3 centuries of upheaval, where there are great times and bad times, and the time of the judges just does this. It actually does this. It doesn't go up and down. It goes in a circle.
Right.
Where the people are right with God, and then they fall away, and then there's this renewal and revival. Then there's this deliverer. Then everything's right. And then it happens. It's sort of like the graph of an abusive relationship. Mm-hmm. They're the ones abusing God, however. It's not,
right.
And being abused by others. And it just keeps cycling through like that. Verse 1 says here in our text that there's a famine at this particular time. So it's insult to injury with the chaos. And it could have been local. It could have been more widespread. There's no food. And that's significant because Bethlehem means house, Beth, of bread. Or house of food. The house of bread has no bread. Mm-hmm. There's no grain to harvest. So this man we are introduced to must leave his home in Bethlehem, cross a border, and reside as a sort of illegal resident in a different country, a country that was often hostile toward Israel, and this man's name is Elimelech. All these names in this first chapter have significant meaning. Just as Bethlehem has a significant meaning. There's a famine in the house of bread. Elimelech, it's hard to say, even when you hadn't had pizza. Elimelech's name means God is king. Mm-hmm. And it's probably, he's probably born when the times are good. in one of those cycles, the Book of
Right.
Judges.
Yeah.
He's probably born as things are rising and stabilizing. God is king, and there's probably with the Book of Ruth a little foreshadowing there. The king is coming. David is coming eventually, and would bring stability. There's a lot going on with the name. The time of Judges is characterized by not having a king. There's no
Right.
national leader of any kind. And Bethlehem would eventually be the birthplace of David. So his name alone has a lot of tangents going on. And his wife is Naomi, a major character in this story. And they have two sons. Naomi means pleasant, by the way. We talked about that last week. And then they have two sons, Mahlon and Chilion. Now, Mahlon means weakling or sickly.
Sickly. Yep.
And Chilion means to fail or to be destroyed. So introduce you and your family. Well, hello, I'm God is my king. This is my wife, Pleasant, and these are our children, Weakling and Failure. I mean, that's
Right.
what the names mean. You're like, oh, dear Lord. Why would you name them that? Because they're children of a famine.
Right.
Because they're children of hard times. They probably are sickly and weak and on the edge of life failing. Mm-hmm. They are not strong, vigorous young men. These are children born in desperate times, and the circumstances dictate their names. So obviously the parents are born in better days, pleasant days,
Pleasant.
when
God is my
right
king.
when God was reigning, but depression and starvation have struck with a vengeance, and this family, in order to survive, has to cross the border into Moab again. We have that map. I used it last week where we look at Moab. If you look at from Bethlehem, and they likely cross through the Judean desert to the north side of the Dead Sea, crossing the River Jordan right there and into Moab, it's probably 50 or 60 miles one way. If you make that walk, it's desert. It is right there at Jericho. If you're looking at that map right now, there's an arrow. Jericho right there. Garrett and I have stood together at the marker that says lowest place on the planet Earth. A mile below sea level right there. And it is a desperate place to take. I can imagine taking that walk. And to walk it with children, if in fact their sons are children. We don't have any guarantee that they're children, but they could have been a little older. This is going to take 7 to 10 days of blistering,
And it is hot.
and it is hot. When we were there together at the Dead Sea, it was 104 degrees.
Yeah.
In
yeah,
March.
It was hot. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
really, really hot.
It's really hot. And once you get out of that bowl where the Dead Sea and the Rift Valley of the Jordan River sits, and you get back up on top of the ridges, you get all
the
the
breeze.
sea breeze off the Mediterranean. And those ridges and hills are fertile. They get more rain. It just doesn't rain down in that salty hole right there because of the dynamics of the weather. And that's a desperate walk. It is a desperate walk. And in my talk on Sunday, I sort of retold the story of Ruth as if Naomi left Mexico and jumped the border into the United States, as a way of taking the story and planning it right into our own psyche of how that would work,
Right. Yeah.
and how desperate of a thing that is. What do we know about Moab? Well, the land is named after a man named Moab, and the name means, I think that's your dog out there, right? I don't know if y'all
I
can
hope
hear it on
it's
the
not-
microphone,
I
but it
hope that's
sounds.
my dog.
I think there's a dog loose out in the hallway. The name Moab means, hey Charlene, good to see you.
That's not what it means.
No, it doesn't mean that. I just saw that Charlene has joined us. The name Moab means of my father. And that doesn't sound too bad. Of my father. Unless you're the boy's mother who gave him this name, because literally the name means incest. We talked about this last week briefly. When Sodom and Gomorrah are destroyed, not far from the Dead Sea area, Fire and brimstone rain down. A man named Lot, Abraham's nephew, is rescued from the city. He leaves the city with his wife and his 2 daughters. The wife turns around and looks at the burning city, and she turns to a pillar of salt. Exactly what that means we don't know, but she is no more. And Lot is left with his 2 young daughters. They're adults, but they're young. Now, this is early in Hebrew theology, really early, time of Abraham, 2,000 years before Jesus. Mm-hmm. And there's no developed concept of the afterlife. So you only lived as long as a bearer of your name lived. If your name, and we see this in the Psalms and other places, if your name perished from the earth, that you did not, and we'll see this later in the book of Ruth, is that she is compelled to carry on the family name to produce sons. So if you didn't have a child that could carry the family name, you cease to exist. And so the daughters get together one night and they say, this fire and brimstone thing's killed all the men around here. We don't have any prospects. And the older daughter says, I'll get Dad drunk tonight and I'll sleep with him, and tomorrow night you do the same thing. And that's what they did in order to perpetuate the family line. And they both are impregnated by their father. One of those babies born is named Moab, and the other is named Ammon after the Ammonites. Mm-hmm. And they would become bitter enemies of Israel for the next 700 years.
The descendants of Abraham.
They're likewise, Abraham's here. Lot is a nephew,
right?
So even in the conflict, they are cousins fighting amongst themselves,
right?
And it really shows, again, how desperate this family is, because Elimelech and his family has gone into Moab, which is a dreaded and centuries long enemy. Mm-hmm. But they have to survive, and that's when they cross over. If folks have questions, please post them now. I'll take a break here. Anything you want to add before we jump on to verses 3 through 14?
Nothing to add.
So they arrive in Moab, this young family, Elimelech, Naomi, the 2 boys. And we pick up at verse 3. Then Elimelech died, and Naomi was left with her 2 sons. The 2 sons married Moabite women. One married a woman named Orpah, and the other a woman named Ruth. But about 10 years later, both Mahlon and Chilion died. This left Naomi alone without her 2 sons or her husband. Then Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had blessed his people in Judah by giving them good crops again. So Naomi and her daughters-in-law got ready to leave Moab to return to her homeland. They're going back to Bethlehem. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she set out from the place where she had been living, and they took the road that would lead them back to Judah. But on the way, Naomi said to her 2 daughter-in-laws, "Go back to your mother's homes, and may the Lord reward you for your kindness to your husbands and to me. May the Lord bless you with the security of another marriage." Then she kissed them goodbye, and they all broke down and wept. "No," they said, "we want to go with you to your people." Let me stop right there. There's a lot of weeping in this passage, because there's a lot of loss.
Yeah.
So much loss. Naomi is displaced. She's living in a country that's not her own. She's living among people whose language is not quite her own. She's living among a people whose religion is not her own. She loses her husband. They weep. Her sons grow up without a father, but they do grow up. They get married. They marry Moabite women. And this is really interesting here. I have a slide for you from Deuteronomy 23. And this is in the Mosaic Law. And this gives you some insight into what I was saying about those two incestual sons of Lot and his daughters. The word of the Lord to Abraham says this: no Ammonite or Moabite or any of their descendants for 10 generations may be admitted to the assembly of the Lord. These nations did not welcome you with food and water when you came out of Egypt. As long as you live, you must never promote the welfare and prosperity of the Ammonites or Moabites. End of verse. How do you spell grudge? There it is in the text. It is codified into the law. The story you were telling earlier, Garrett, they're delivered out of slavery. They come into the Sinai desert. And then after 40 years of wandering in that desert, they make that turn for the promised land. And the Ammonites and the Moabites, their cousins, won't help them.
Mm-hmm.
And so, a pox be on you and your house. Moses curses them right here in the law. And it's so codified and so severe that had Naomi had daughters, and if those daughters had married men from Moab, they would have been expelled from Hebrew society.
Yeah.
And you read that part there where it says, hey, Kurt Eckerman, good to see you. And Peggy Crunk has joined us as well. And it says up to 10 generations. That's a symbolic term that you find in the Old Testament a lot. It means forever. So, if you have a Moabite great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, you can't say, okay, now I'm in. It's been 10 generations. No, you're out.
Right.
Period. But because these are Moabite women, there is no such restrictions, which is interesting. But neither of Naomi's sons can produce a child. And what with their names like Weakling and Failure, of course they can't. And a decade into these marriages, the two men die, and now Naomi has lost her husband and her sons. And she decides to go home. Word gets back to her that things are better back in Bethlehem. She tells her daughter-in-laws, go home, start over, find you a man. But the two women, Orpah and Ruth, are committed to staying with their mother-in-law. There's an obvious bond there. They love her. We are going with you, they say. And then let's pick up at verse number 11. Verses 11 through 14. But Naomi replied, why should you go on with me? Can I still give birth to other sons who would grow up to be your husbands? No, my daughters, return to your parents' home, for I am too old to marry again. And even if it were possible and I were to get married tonight and bear sons, then what? Would you wait for them to grow up and refuse to marry someone else? No, of course not, my daughters. Things are far more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord himself has raised his fist against me. Let's remember that phrase. And again they wept together, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye. But Ruth clung tightly to Naomi. I just love Naomi right here. This exchange is as honest as it gets. Mm-hmm. She appreciates them. She loves them. And obviously they both love her. I mean,
right.
They're going to go with her. They're going to jump the border with her. And they will become as she has been. Strangers in a strange land. Going to live among a people that are different culturally, different religiously, different socially. Completely foreign. Mm-hmm. But this bond that they have with Naomi is something. Naomi must have been, just a force of a woman.
Pleasant. She must have been.
She's
a pleasant woman.
But to elicit this kind of devotion out of her daughters-in-law. I mean, God knows that not every mother and daughter-in-laws have this kind of relationship.
Right.
How do we? Is that a gently way of saying it? But obviously these do. And she says, if I had a man right now, and I gave birth tonight, you gonna wait 20 years?
Gonna stick around?
You gonna stick around for 20 years?
By that time, they're gonna be aged women as well.
Yeah. Are you gonna raise the children that will become your husbands? Of course not.
Yeah. I mean, what we're seeing play out too is what we're seeing unfold is really the heart of Naomi in her grief, in her understanding of the situation of everything I have is gone. Everything that I once had that was good is now lost.
And think about that phrase: "The Lord Himself has raised His fist against me." And it's not even God's forgotten me, or God's put too much on me that I can't. God is using me as a punching bag.
Right.
He is kicking the crap out of me.
Sounds familiar for a lot of people.
For a lot of people, it does. And Naomi, if there's one thing you're going to find about Naomi in this whole story, is she is brutally honest and brutally practical. She was willing to leave her home to survive. That's practical. She understood what she had to do. Now she's willing to go back because she's lost everything, and there's food back home. And I'm sure as they're walking that road out of town, she's comforted by her daughters-in-law's presence. But finally, she just has to say, "This is insanity. You can't do this." Mm-hmm. Orpah goes home. Ruth clings to her. Great word. It's the same word used in Genesis. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife. So it means to stick together. And that's how Ruth feels toward Naomi. I'm going to stick with you. But the word also means to overtake. So the picture in her mind is that Naomi is walking and Ruth won't leave. "I'm leaving, I'm going." And Ruth says, "Okay." And Ruth is just like right there. It's sort of like, you've got young kids. Do your kids ever wrap themselves around your legs and won't let you walk?
Oh, yeah. All
that
throughout
kind
the
of
day,
thing.
yeah.
That's the picture. I can remember a few times when school would start back, kindergarten, first grade, of prying a child out of the car or onto the bus. That desperate holding on.
Don't make me go.
Don't
leave me here.
That's the picture of Ruth's commitment to Naomi.
And the interesting thing to think about too is, what would it have been like for Elimelech and Naomi and the sons to leave this land that they've inherited, at this land set apart as God saying, "This is your land. You are going to be my people," and for them to leave that, the humiliation of
the desperation.
We can't. Yeah, the humiliation, desperation. We can't make it here. We have to go there amongst our enemies.
Right. And
that's
huge. A great point, because we'll see later in the story that Elimelech was actually a landowner.
Yeah.
He had an inheritance there, land that would not produce grain. Yeah. The famine was so bad. So he's got a homestead that he abandoned for this period of time.
And that's coming up.
Yeah, we'll see that in the chapters to come. Moving on to verse 15 and following through to verse 18 of chapter 1. The primal text of the book of Ruth. Here it is. "Look," Naomi said to Ruth, "your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. You should do the same." But Ruth replied, "Do not ask me to leave you and turn back. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord punish me severely if I allow anything but death to separate us." And when Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she said nothing more. I've used this text a ton at weddings. You've done a couple weddings, right?
Yeah. Never use this, though.
It's a great text.
Yeah.
And it is the perfect narration of what clinging tightly means. Mm-hmm. Naomi insists. Now, these are two stubborn women, and poor Mahlon is probably the weakling that he was, crushed between these two great rocks. These two great, fierce, beautiful women. Naomi, his mother, and Ruth, his wife. Oh, I mean, the chutzpah on this road is so Good to see. I mean, they're duking it out about who's going to give in first. And Ruth prevails.
It's interesting too because in previous verses, God's hand was against me, and then Ruth turns around and is like, "Hey, I'll take on take on this God. I don't care.
I'm going.
I'm going with you."
Yeah.
I mean, for her, oh man, that's wild. That's like you said, chutzpah.
Oh,
like
absolutely.
These I'd have to do the research and study on it. What we know about the Moabites is that they worshipped horrific gods.
Yeah, I'm coming up with that. Don't steal my thunder.
I'm not going to steal it, but they worshipped horrific gods, and for her to go, well,
but that's a perfect segue.
God's hand is against me.
We would say,
I'd rather have that.
We would say that Ruth comes to Jesus on this road. Even in her tenacity. She's at the revival meeting and she walks the aisle and says the prayer and gets baptized right here. Because not only is she going to a country that's foreign, a language that is foreign, a society that is foreign, she is making a religious conversion.
She goes through water to get there too.
Standing right here on the road. I'll refer you to a slide here. There are 3 different names used for God in Ruth chapter 1. Did you know that?
Only because you told me.
Oh, okay.
The Bible only tells me Lord.
That's right. That's right. Though we're
it only says Lord.
We're gonna explain that. Hey, Frank Brown, glad that you have joined us.
Frankie B.
So here's the slide. You have it there in front of you. 3 different names used for God in Ruth in Ruth chapter 1, and we'll just leave this slide up for a few minutes.
This is so cool.
The first name used is Yahweh, sometimes spelled with a J. This is a specific personal name for God as revealed to Moses at the burning bush. When Moses says, "Well, you want me to go deliver these people? Who should I say has sent me?" And God's answer is, "You tell him I am that I am." Yahweh, the great I am. This word is such a holy word that, as you see it there on the screen, Jewish folks won't even use the vowels. They only use the consonants because they're so honoring to the name, they won't say the name. And they often say, "Blessed be the name," but won't say the name. This is God's personal name. This is the Jewish God. I am that I am. It can also mean the one that causes all to exist. I love that. Now, that is really, we didn't talk about that much, in Bible college and seminary. It was just I am, but literally the one who causes all to exist.
Like the Colossians passage.
Yeah, very similar to that. Hear, O Israel, the Lord God, He is one. Yahweh is the one. And Naomi uses this word 6 times in chapter 1. And you can always pick it out in your English Bible. What Garrett has said. Most translations use all caps of the word Lord when the proper name of God is being used. So you're reading your Bible and you see Lord, capital L, little o, little r, little d. That's a generic use of the word Lord. You can also, in the New Testament, it can mean sir. But if you ever see Lord used in the Older New Testament and all 4 letters are capitalized, it is the English translator's way of telling you that the proper name for God is being used. So that's the first word that is used. The second word, Elohim. Now, this is a generic word for God. It's not God's name. It's not God with a big G. It's God with a little g. God in general. And Ruth uses this word twice.
We could also use bro.
Bro,
the man,
the man upstairs,
the big guy.
Those are all generic terms, and so they could use.
I'm just going to start using Elohim.
They could use Elohim, and there's no offense given,
right?
Because you're not using God's proper name,
right?
And then the third word is El Shaddai, and it means the God Almighty. And again, it's not a proper name. It is a description of God, God's power. And Naomi uses this word twice when she returns to Bethlehem, and we'll see that in a second. So I want you to notice I've got verses 16 and 17 with some script notes in it, Garrett, there. And let's look at this slide, and we'll see why this is important. But Ruth replied, same text we were reading just a moment ago, "Don't ask me to leave you or turn back. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God,"
Generic,
Elohim, "will be my God," Elohim. "Wherever you die, I will die. There I will be buried." And then she says it. "May the Lord punish me severely if I allow anything but death to separate us." Yahweh. Ruth invokes the name of God, the God of Israel. She makes her vow to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, you've already mentioned the Moabites have a God. And his name was Chemosh. And it means the destroyer. The Moabite God destroys. The Hebrew God grants existence. Think about that. Chemosh, the destroyer. I am that I am, the one who gives existence to all things. So that's the contrast. Look at 1 Kings 11, 7 through 9. This is years later, but it gives you an insight into what was going on with the Moabites. 1 Kings 11, verses 7 through 9, the time of Solomon. On the Mount of Olives, east of Jerusalem, Solomon built a pagan shrine for Chemosh, the detestable god of Moab, and another for Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. There they are again, the two cousins. Verse 8, Solomon built such shrines for all his foreign wives to use for burning incense and sacrificing to their gods. The Lord, Yahweh, was very angry with Solomon, for his heart had turned away from Yahweh, the Elohim of Israel.
For a guy to be as wise as Solomon was, he was an idiot.
He was an idiot. He was an idiot. What made these gods? What made these gods of Moab and of the Ammonites detestable? They sacrificed
the sacrifices.
They sacrificed children. They committed human sacrifice. It's what all primitive religions demanded. If you look at primitive religion in almost any shape or form in Asia, Europe, Africa, North America, South America, Europe, the Middle East, the Near Mideast, anywhere that religion took hold, you see that the earliest religions are all bloody. They all demand a human sacrifice because there was the understanding that life was in the blood, life is in the body, and life must be given for life.
Right.
The Moabites, even 800 years before Jesus, and the Ammonites, 800 years before Jesus, are still sacrificing humans. It's detestable.
Right.
The Hebrew faith had made the cosmic leap to animal sacrifice. And that's bad for the animal, but it's good for humans.
And this goes back to our conversation on Wednesday night 9 months ago.
Right.
We talked about this.
Yeah.
This all shifts and changes drastically with Abraham and Isaac.
Yeah, if you talk about the not even Judeo-Christian, I think that's sort of an artificial creation, but the Judeo view from the Old Testament is that life, God gives all things existence. And that the progress made throughout the Old Testament is moving toward an ethic of life and out of the primitive death-dealing religions. And
which is a great reminder for us even today.
Yes.
That life progresses towards more life.
And then we have the last section of the chapter, verses 19 through 22, quickly. So the two of them, Naomi and Ruth now, continued on their journey. When they came to Bethlehem, the entire town was excited by their arrival. "Is it really Naomi?" the women asked. "Don't call me Naomi," she responded. "Instead, call me Mara, for the Almighty has made my life very bitter for me. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me home empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has caused me to suffer and the Almighty has sent such tragedy upon me?" So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by her daughter-in-law Ruth, the young Moabite woman. They arrived in Bethlehem in late spring at the beginning of the barley harvest. Maybe 20 years between the time Naomi left and the time she came home. And it's a sensation when she comes back. Like going back for your 20-year class reunion. Everybody's there. And they said, "Oh, it's Naomi." And she says, "Nope, my name's Mara," which means
Bitter.
bitter.
Which is funny because there's a girl I went to college with named Mara.
It's a beautiful name. It just has tough meaning.
Once you get behind me, wait a sec. Wait, what does my name mean now? Oh man.
She's past anger. She's past grief. She's past hurt. She's resentful. She's all vinegar now.
Yes, there's a lot of reasons to be that way too. Culturally, she's a woman.
Oh, she's powerless.
In a patriarchal society. Yeah, she has no husband. She has no standing. Who's going to marry her? Nobody. She's too old. She can't produce.
And she has no lineage. Her name and in that culture, her husband's name would die.
Yep.
So we're back to what we were talking about what even drove the incest. Yep. We can't let the name die because we disappear from the face of the earth. Mm-hmm. She uses the names she uses for God in verses 19 through 22 is where she uses the term El Shaddai. The God Almighty has done this to me.
God Almighty.
And this is important too, because by invoking that name, she is saying God is responsible for this. Because God is all powerful. God is the Almighty. And if this is not the way things should be, then God would have stopped it. Very fatalistic. Incredibly fatalistic. But that's where she is. Now, I'm not going to condemn her.
Right. Yeah.
I have felt that way toward God and have suffered far less than she has. Far less. But it really gives you her mindset.
And that's what makes this story so timeless and so transcendent is it's because this story is so relatable to so many people that have suffered, thinking about last year and all that people have gone through, all that people have lost, with 420,000 just in the US alone. That's
1.5 million people around the world.
420,000 individuals with family members, sons, daughters, parents. It's so relatable in so many different ways.
Yeah, just by the numbers. Once you adjust for population in the years, our country is up 500,000 additional deaths in 2020. 500,000 people died this year, more than have ever died.
It's wild to think about.
And there are people that lost multiple family members, lost multiple friends.
So when
you've suffered loss, I've suffered loss. I've had that more than one dark night of the soul where you want to say, now God, it's like Naomi talking to Ruth. Look here, look, this isn't right, and you have raised your fist against me. And if you're the Almighty, well, the only reason this has happened is because you've allowed it. You've caused it.
Yeah.
It's one of the things to say God allowed it. She's past that too. God has caused this. And that's a rough place to live.
That's where we go back to our text messages. And, Ronnie brought up the idea of maybe we should spend a next week talking about this. I was like, look, we promised these people 6 weeks. If we get into this could be like 16 weeks.
But we may come back to this a little bit next week, because
it's so,
the mindset is important.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Naomi comes home embittered. Ruth is with her, and Ruth, as you will see, Ruth is just this picture of. She's a beautiful person.
Yeah, just like that picture right there.
Yeah, just like this picture behind me. She's a beautiful person, and she's faithful. And if you don't hear anything else tonight, hear this. Right here, is this where we are?
Yeah.
The way Ruth lived her life, in spite of all she had suffered, actually broke through to Naomi in her bitterness.
Mm-hmm.
Praying didn't get her there. Bible study didn't get her there. Living with someone who had not lost hope got her there. That's powerful.
We're not saying don't come back next week.
No, please come back. Please come back.
No, there's so much more to the story. It's so beautiful. Like I said, it's the rest of the story and how it plays out. I mean, I assume most people are familiar with it, but even if they're not, the way it plays out as the beginning is so relatable to us even today. It's a great and healthy reminder that God is behind the scenes in good ways, that God can redeem the broken. It's really remarkable.
And I'm not doing this. I would not set aside the inspiration of Scripture and the spiritual lessons and the applications. But if you read this story as literature,
yeah,
you read this story as a telling of the Hebrew story itself, and it's as impactful in 4 little chapters and has as much depth as any piece of literature you will read in human civilization. It is alive.
Oh yeah,
with the experience of people with tragedy, with
humanity.
hope, and with God.
It's the human experience.
Yeah. And that alone is genius.
Mm-hmm.
It's genius when you read it like that. Our hour has gone.
Here 1 second, gone the next.
Just like that.
It's like a mist. It's like a vapor.
Hey, thanks everybody for joining us tonight. And these sessions will be uploaded to YouTube. And when all these sessions are finished, we will be publishing the audio of all the sessions together so that you can have that. And I think we'll probably put some of these slides and resources together who, folks can use that as well. And we'll figure out how we'll publish that to you. You're welcome, Noel. Peggy, that's the question, isn't it? And then Kurt, living with someone who has not lost hope. Man, that's where it's at.
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing about what church and faith community are about. To
Right.
remind ourselves that, we carry hope in our hearts.
Mm-hmm.
So thanks, everybody. Thanks, Garrett, for hosting.
Absolutely.
And for your great technological skills to put all of this together. And we will see you Sunday, 11 o'clock, broadcasting on Facebook, uploaded to YouTube. And we'll see you for the next Ruth study, Chapter 2. Chapter 2 is about the Redeemer. That third major character in the book of Ruth shows himself. And we'll pick it up right there. Thanks, everybody.